A very good evening and a warm welcome to you from Pakhuis de Zwijger. And of course, a warm welcome to another episode of Designing Cities for All. Of course, that's our 2-year-long research and activity program in which we take a deep dive into designing products, places and systems for all. We've been having this triptych, and tonight is the last episode. And the title of the triptych is Creating Cultures of Care, in which we rethink the city from a feminist and also a care point of view. Caring cities, caring for people, health, safety, and the collective well-being are at the heart of decision-making. And at that, we emphasize the value of paid and unpaid care work for everybody. We will uncover how we can redesign cities and the healthcare system, human relationship to enable a culture of care grounded in values like compassion, empathy, and equity for all. Last week, we talked about redesigning mental health care, and some of our main findings were that we truly have to create cities. We have to create cities that slow down, that create space, and create more time for connection, reflection, and for silence as well. Today, like I said, is the last part of this triptych, and it's called Creating Cultures of Care, and specifically rituals of self-care. And we've got amazing guests for that tonight. It's great to be here, it's great to have this program, and it's great to have an audience as well. So warm welcome to you all. Maybe you can give a small applause to let people know that you're actually here. Yes. Great to have you all. Of course, if you want to join in the conversation, and that goes for the people that are watching our live stream, but people here as well, you can go to menti.com on any device, and on menti.com you can. They will ask you for a code. If you insert the code 13094996, that's 13094996, and the code will be shown during the program as well. There you can leave questions. If you tell me who the question is directed to, I will make sure that the right question is aimed at the right person. So go to menti.com and use the code 13094996. Right. Let's get to work. We've got several amazing guests, and our first guest is Kursat Ozenc. He's a designer, educator, and author specializing in work and rituals and cultures. And he joins us via Zoom. Kursat, are you there? A warm welcome to you.
I'm here. Thanks so much.
Good to have you here. You're going to introduce the concept of rituals, and specifically in the light of caring and caring cities. You've got a presentation prepared, so I'd say take it away.
Thank you so much. Let me share my screen. Okay. So welcome everyone. So yeah, my name is Kursat Ozenc. So I'm a designer and educator. I'm connecting from California, sunny California. So welcome. So we typically start our workshops or talks with a quick ritual. So I thought, yeah, I will do the same for this audience. So we call this spread the warmth. So we will try this quickly. So the idea here is, yeah, you will make a small wish, like for care, like whatever it's in your mind. For me, it's I will water my plants more, for instance. That might be my wish. And then we will rub our hands together briskly, and then at the count of 3, I want you to, if you are in the live audience, maybe put your warm palms towards the ceiling, and if you are on the screen, do this towards the screen. Okay, let's try this. So yeah, spend 10 seconds, come up with a care wish, a self-care wish, or whatever you want to wish for. Okay, now start rubbing your hands briskly to the point that they are warm. Okay, mine is warm. 3, 2, 1. Now, time for putting them into the ceiling or the screen. Cool. This was a short ritual. Hope you enjoyed it. We will talk more about why rituals bring different parts of our world, like the mind and body. And this was a quick example of connecting our mind and body with rituals. So let's, today I will briefly talk about how might we create cultures of care by leveraging the power of rituals. And we will look at power of rituals, why they matter. And I will give you a couple of examples that I found, and then what's next, like how can you take these ideas and play with them. So let's start with the power of rituals piece. So when we think of culture, like in city scale, in the nation scale, it's a little bit nebulous, right? It's like something very soft and intangible. But it doesn't have to be. Like when we look at culture from more like, if you are designers, we can say, oh, okay, actually culture, we can visualize it, right? Culture is an interplay between visible and invisible forces. And visible forces are things that we can see, like artifacts, behaviors, metrics. But there are also these invisible forces, the beliefs, values, and assumptions we have. And our point of view is that we can bring visual and systems thinking to almost look at what's out there in the culture, like what are the visible things and invisible things, and try to bridge those visible with the invisible. And that's where ritual comes into play. So rituals, between these invisible and visible worlds, rituals is one way to shift culture. So what we always say is that rituals make invisible visible. So and take this maybe one further, rituals help us to manifest our values in the visible world. So it makes our values tangible and graspable. You might be asking, what's a ritual? Let's do a quick working definition. This is not ritual is such a rich concept that you can come up with many different definitions, but let's keep this as a starting point. So rituals are actions that a person or group does repeatedly, and it usually follows a similar pattern or script. So the more traditional ones, like the religion, sports, they follow the script, but in our daily lives, maybe it's more patterns that we follow the same pattern. And the differentiation between a ritual and routine comes in when the last piece of this definition. So rituals involve some kind of symbolism and meaning. So we intentionally invest meaning into these actions. So over the years, we have been teaching ritual design at Stanford D School, and the idea is really, how do we leverage the methods that we learn from human-centered design to intentionally build culture, whether it means increasing the culture of teams, organizations. You can scale this to cities, but like, how do you listen to people and then turn those insights into more intangible and actionable rituals, right? And ritual is not a new term, so it goes back to Durkheim, right? Like even the beginning of the modern humanities, but even now, I think different disciplines, from marketing to performance studies, they look at how rituals can influence behavior, influence human behavior. And one key insight from all that research is this concept of behavioral synchronicity. So rituals work because they bring these two ways of being in sync. So they mainly bring our minds and bodies together. So when we are going through a ritual, let's say we do a walking meeting ritual, that by walking together, we also synchronize our thinking. So maybe we will have a better meeting with our teammate, right? And I will share a couple of principles that we learned by studying, designing, and looking at collecting rituals. So first one is, rituals work in a spectrum. So some rituals are very well coordinated, very well designed. So this is a famous Burning Man ritual in the Nevada desert. But they can also be very small and everyday, right? You can just take your Sunday morning and bring more intentionality. Okay, I will revive my old newspaper reading habit, and then you can create that Sunday newspaper ritual, for instance. So that's the first takeaway. So you can really design rituals in a spectrum. It doesn't have to be always huge and choreographed. You can scale down and start small. So another principle or learning is rituals make culture goals tangible. So you want to bring more empathy, creativity in your teams or in your city. You can think that, oh, okay, this ritual embodies that goal, embodies that intention. So, and then you can start from there. The second principle is this idea of energy. So if you look at ourselves as a bundle of energy, so in a given day, 24 hours, we need to manage that energy, right? Across and you can scale this to the city. So we need to manage the energy of the city. So you can use rituals to regulate that energy. In certain cases, in this hacker ritual instance, you want to dial up the energy. So you want to bring people's energy up. So rituals is a vehicle for that. But in other cases, maybe you want to decrease the energy, then what will you do is you will bring a calming ritual, for instance. So that's the second one. And another key learning or principle is this idea of rituals making the everyday special. So you almost create this magic circle around ritual that the business of the everyday life is almost suspended, and then you can be someone else. You can be something that you are part of something bigger than yourself. So these are some principles that you can apply. But when I started talking to Packhouse, I was looking at what are some examples in this space, and then I came up with a couple of ones. So one of them is this idea in post-COVID or during COVID times. What happened is people started creating these appreciation rituals in New York, like every day at 7 p.m. Let's just quickly watch first. You get the idea. So every day at 7 p.m., people started cheering for the frontline workers, right? This was a way of showing appreciation, showing that, oh, we care for you as well. So this is very subtle ritual that you can maybe take this as an opportunity. Maybe you can think other rituals you can design around. So let's look at another one. Let's see. Okay, this is from Taiwan. So I recently come across this one. So every day at 8 p.m. or some time, a garbage truck came to the neighborhood. And then this is almost like a trigger for coming to gather around. And then it's almost became a ritual in Taiwan. Like every evening, people coming out and then start talking to each other because that was their trigger moment, right? 才知道说哦，垃圾车来了，要倒垃圾了，那很好听啊。Okay, I think for time's sake, so we got the idea, and then maybe the last one is from Colombia. So in Colombia,
this weekly event takes place every Sunday from 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. and it is now a firm part of Colombian culture. The first ever ciclovia took place on 15th of December 1974. These days, over 1.7 million people turn out for the event every week. Bogota's population is over 8 million people, so it's roughly 1/4 of all city.
Okay, so this Colombian ritual is every Sunday, 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. They close certain parts of the roads across the city, and it creates almost this, container for people to go out and start practicing healthy behaviors. So it's really becoming a catalyst for changing the entire cities, like Bogota's culture, right? So you can think of these as almost as small ways to bring change in the city context. Like the New York example was more organic, so people just start doing it. And then the Taiwanese and the Colombian example, they were more intentional. So I think my call to action is like, how do we increase those intentional ones, like the one with the Bogota or the one with Taiwan? How do we bring those in different parts of the city and different neighborhoods to create those kind of change, self-care or care change that we want to aim for.
Slovenia. This weekly event.
Okay, and what's next? So if you think culture or like rituals are a good way to influence city culture, so what are the things that we can do? I think one thing we emphasize in our teaching and in our writings is that this idea of evolution, like ritual evolves over time to better suit people and situations. So if you take this, maybe one other key insight is that, yeah, you can design these ritual experiments, but don't take them as the final word. Like they will always evolve, and they will bring, you can adjust those rituals to fit people's needs and desires. And another, maybe the last point, or running over time, one last key takeaway is when you are introducing rituals, always think about this idea of bringing novelty, but not too new, not too familiar. So finding that sweet spot between too novel and too familiar, so that people can adapt to those rituals. So they are not too far out or too familiar. So finding that spot is very important. And that concludes my talk. And if you are curious, we have a newsletter and a website that you can take a look. And thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the table discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kursat. There can be applause because you're here now. Just a very quick question, because this is what you do with Ritual Design Lab, and you teach most of your classes at the Stanford Institute of Design, and there you teach ritual design. There's a question I wondered, because you know, when we're talking about designing cities for all, usually when cities were designed, you know, in olden times, and especially in Western Europe, it was designed around places of ritual called churches. Now, religion is a very strong influence on the rituals that were created and that we still have. Is this a way, because you know, society is being more secularized as we move along? Is this a way to create new rituals because we don't have a religion to do that for us anymore?
Definitely, that's one. I think, yeah, one of the reasons why I thought I started this initiative, like this idea of, yeah, we lost that connection to meaning making and purpose, and in a way, I think we need to almost revive that notion of how do we, because the rituals are a way for us to get closer to something bigger than ourselves. So I will say, yeah, secular rituals is one way. By reviving or by creating these rituals, we can find places to make meaning for ourselves. Right? Yeah, I would say it's almost a need that we forgot in the Industrial Revolution. But now, okay, now we figured out the productivity piece. But how do we, yeah, bring back the things that are beyond practicality, beyond functionality, and then
right.
Yeah.
And can we use social media in that sense? Is that part of a new ritual? Waking up and posting your first post on Instagram or TikTok, is that a form of creating new rituals as well that can offer solace or can offer hope as well, or a connection with each other?
I think that's a good question. Yeah, recently I talked. There was a piece around Wordle. Like in the US right now, the big thing is this puzzle, the Wordle, and then the idea is you solve a puzzle it's like a Wheel of Fortune, but it's online, and then it's really took off, and then lots of people were doing every morning. The first thing they do is running their puzzle and then sharing how they did in the puzzle. So definitely, I think that's one of what excites me about this new world, is like the post-COVID world, is people found ways to create meaning through these hybrid virtual rituals as well. Like them sharing on social media can be a very like a tiny ritual that they do, Yeah, I think that's, I would say so. Yeah, like in US right now, Wordle is the ritual,
Wordle is
like
it?
every morning.
And here in Holland, we say Wordle is stolen from a Dutch television program called Lingo.
Oh, really?
But you will have that. I heard that you will in the States that will be introduced as well. And if I'm correct, RuPaul is going to present that. But that's a whole other discussion. It's we're talking about rituals now. Thank you for now. We'll talk to you later in the program as well. So thank you for now. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to introduce our next guest. That's Yelizaveta Strakhova, and she's a spatial practitioner. A warm welcome to you. A spatial practitioner, what is that?
Well, my practice is somewhere in between art and architecture, but then I predominantly am curious in spaces. So that's what kind of the space is what unites it. And then a lot of the times I can describe it as art that needs to be functional in order for it to work, for example, or since it exists somewhere in between, it makes sense to say that I am curious in the space and the implications of the spaces, and the space is defined not only by the physical space, but also political and economical, and a lot of layers that exist within it, and kind of trying to understand what is there to see and work with.
Because every space is political in a sense, or every space is influenced by economics one way or another.
I mean, it was created somehow, so then a lot of factors influence its the way it's forming and shaping, and there's history that has shaped it, and then kind of every space possesses a lot of information, and then when you enter the space or you work with the space, you can always choose what you decide to connect with, or like what thread you want to take out and pick up and pay attention to. So.
We're talking about rituals tonight, and one of the rituals that you're researching and making as a practice, which fascinates me because it's my love as well, is bathing.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? Why bathing and why explore that ritual?
Yeah. I think it started somehow with fascination with water as better. So the starting point for me was water, and then I was thinking about ways that humans engage, and then it felt that one of the simplest ways and one of the most understandable ways is bathing. So the first one maybe is drinking, that's like that's a necessity, and then potentially the next one that has a little bit less that gives a little bit more choice of how to engage with it and when and why is bathing. And I am researching human water relationships, but predominantly in the urban environment, because I'm interested in how, as a starting point, can we recognize water as a resource within the urban realm? And so for me, the connection with bathing felt like quite a nice link to make an interactive way for people to engage with it, so not only as a dialogue but as a physical experience.
But that's a funny thing, because especially in highly populated areas like city, bathing is one of the first things to go, because there's an immense difference between bathing and showering. I think 99% of the people are able to shower, but not everybody's able to bathe. What does that mean for a society, or when you design a city? What's the relevance of bathing versus showering?
Well, showering, I guess it's more, it's more about practicality, it's about hygiene. And then I think bathing has a lot of potential as a practice. So in the 20th century, there was kind of a hygiene revolution where a lot of bathhouses were built to kind of satisfy the hygiene needs and kind of clean the population. But also it was a way of bringing nature into the city in a way. So that's the way they were designed. They were kind of these bodies of water, quite artificially made, but in terms of aesthetics, they were still using the kind of natural colors and things. So now that the hygienic part is satisfied within the confines of the home, it has been delegated to the house. Bathing spaces do not necessarily need to satisfy this function of cleaning your own body for it to be clean. So then the question is, what are they there for? And sometimes they're, in a lot of countries, even where the bathing culture is very strong, they're closing down more and more. So the culture of bathing becomes kind of more closed off and smaller. So then this question of what they can become or what they can be is what I'm very interested in, because I see water as a natural resource. It's just circulates through the artificial made infrastructure, but it's a huge body of water, but we don't appreciate it the same way we appreciate a lake or a river that we can see. So then I imagine that bathing spaces can also be maybe regarded as spaces that can become those of appreciation of a resource or building a relationship and structuring it around care for the space, for the resource, and therefore once you start caring about the space, you start caring also about yourself and about the people around you. So then it kind of becomes this circular relationship, which I'm very curious how to develop.
I'm very. I love the points you make in the story, but I also wonder about accessibility. We'll talk about that a little bit later, because to put it into practice is that you studied at the Sandberg Institute, and there you graduated in 2019, and there you presented a communal bathing experience. Can you tell us about what that entailed?
Yeah, it was a kind of large food bath that was built in the street. It was at Van Ostaddestraat in De Pijp, and people could easily enter it. The only thing they had to do is kind of go through the entrance where they had to wash their feet before they came into the water. And there, the nicest part was that since it's in the street, it's very, everyone who passed by and was interested could engage with it very easily. So it didn't have this way of like, because when you make it in the space that I made it now, that it's a bit more closed off, there is a much bigger barrier maybe to entering the space. There, the beauty was that a lot of people, varied people, could engage with it very easily. So that was kind of the beautiful part, and it was very interesting to see the dynamics and who entered the bath as well. Somehow there were much more foreigners who entered, and then a lot of the residents were very eager to engage in a conversation, but not very eager to participate.
Why is that?
Yeah, I find it very curious. I think there is like this. Basically, when you share water, it's very intimate, I think, because when we all share the air that we breathe, but we are kind of, it's invisible, so we're not that aware of it. But with the water, when you enter a smaller body of water, I think a lot of the times I saw that people are kind of checking out who is sitting there, do they want to share the space with them? And then also this kind of initial ritual of washing your feet, it is supposed to kind of relax this moment a little bit, because you see how that the other person is taking kind of care of themselves by washing the feet, therefore they're taking care of you also by entering the space clean.
But
so,
that's interesting, because it's not a communal thing to bathe or to clean yourself anymore.
Yeah.
So I think what you describe now, it's very intimate to be there in a space where somebody else is washing their feet or somebody's washing somebody's feet. It's very intimate, and we're not used to that anymore in society. When we talk about accessibility, I think that showering is accessible for 99% of the people, but bathing is, you have to have money to be able to do that. So if we talk about designing cities for all, how can we go about by creating rituals, being aware of rituals, being aware of the ritual of bathing, but making it accessible for everybody?
I think I don't have a straightforward answer for that, because it's something that I'm trying to figure out yet. But I think it's very much tied to how you create a space. So, and who creates a space. So, for example, if I as a maker make a space and then I create rules in it, it's a very different space to enter than if there is a community of people who is building, let's say, a bathing space, because potentially then it's a different way of organizing the resources. and money, and then the accessibility is different, and then potentially people who engage with it is a much more diverse crowd of people than if it just starts from me. Because for now it starts, the spaces that I create, they start from me just because I need to understand and engage and then understand how to organize this process. But also like collecting water has been a human necessity. So water has always been a necessity. So then places where people gathered, collected the water or stored the water, they were always places of meeting and gatherings, like water fountains or wells, and they were kind of social spaces. And now we don't really have this moment of having to collect the water. So I'm very interested in how these kind of production cycles, I call it kind of semantic language of water scarcity, because a lot of the times in countries where there is a lack of water, the body is much more engaged in the process of collecting it, preparing it, and therefore there are many more chances for communal engagement and kind of alone. It is such a large and hard to contain resource, it is much easier to work with it in a community. So then,
but isn't, like I asked Kursat as well, it hasn't the ritual changed, and maybe we don't recognize it as a ritual at the moment, because in summer, if you go to the park, you know, there are lakes here where people swim. They have a communal experience, not only to not to clean their bodies, but to have a physical activity.
Yeah.
And they're not doing it at the same time, maybe, but sharing, you know, coming together with a large body of water is still something that's very present in the Netherlands and in nowadays society. Yeah. Is that the same as bathing, or is that different?
Yeah, I would really consider it the same. I think it's great that people here really engage with like natural water sources. I think in Moscow, where I'm from, it's a bit different because the access to it or the quality of water is a bit different. And I think the eagerness to engage with water is there and very big. For me, there is an interest, personal interest in like there you can see it's a lake, it's a natural resource, and therefore people are attracted to it. So for me, there is this small kind of difference of the fact that the water for bathing a lot of the times comes from the infrastructure. So kind of this twist of like how to recognize this body of water as something that can bring the same pleasure, or how to, because once the rituals of bathing, they don't satisfy anymore, they don't need to satisfy the hygienic kind of part. We can assign to them a different value. So we potentially, they can be places that we recognize the value of rituals, the value of recognize, how do you say it? Basically us appreciating the resource that we have. Because once you don't have it, like...
Yeah. If that's a scarcity or a lack of it, you then maybe appreciate it. But can you tell us, because you're working on a bathing space on the Walle, in the red light district at the moment, can you tell us about that?
I got this space. I have a studio. It's so right now there are plans to move the red light district away from the Walle and to the outskirts of the city, and it's quite, I find, a sad plan for gentrification of the whole neighborhood. But as a part of it, I got an anti-crack studio there, and brothels, and it is a brothel. And
it was or is?
Well, it was a brothel, but so it's like 3 windows, which each of them leads to the room. And I don't know if brothels in other countries are as kind of utilitarian in design as in the Netherlands, but it's basically a space that is covered in tiles and it's made to be cleaned. And when you enter it, kind of the first thing that comes to mind actually is that it looks like more like a bathroom than
a bathing space, because it's tiled.
Exactly. So for me, it was a very interesting experience of being in a brothel, and it was a very controversial experience, and it made me think so much and engage with the context a lot. And then I wanted to open it up because I think just being in the space is very important and allows you to physically kind of connect with the issues that are happening, or kind of relate to them in a different way, not in a conceptual, oh, I understand that there are these issues kind of thing, but more physically.
What are we going to experience there? What are we going to experience there?
Well, you can come. It's not a full bathing experience because I also found that I think it's quite a loaded space.
Yeah.
So then there is there needs to be a soft way of kind of engaging with it. So there is a need for a little bit of vulnerability, and you kind of change, and it's more like also very large food bath with different temperatures and ways to engage with the environment by walking and massaging, and so it's kind of a space that was
What's
flooded.
the communal aspect of it? Is it something that you do together or that you do individually?
Yes, it's totally. I mean, I can accommodate only 5 people because of Corona at the same time, so it's not a very big space. But I invited people to come there, and I think because of Corona and the weather, it's a bit smaller groups of people who come. So I think the most was like 4 people at the same time. But then it's very interesting how people move, because you also like kind of through thermoregulation, you stay in hot water, then you move in cold, and then there is kind of this interaction. And also when you enter the space, you also wash your feet, and then you can I wash feet for people, and people can wash feet for each other. So they're kind of, I'm trying to understand path kind of for engaging, because I think I'm interested in rituals, but I also believe that I can't come up with a ritual and tell people to do it. I think it has to come organically and with time. So for me, I'm creating these spaces, and then also it works a little bit as my studio, because it's very rare for me to have a large body of water that I can observe. But the thing is, like, I treat water as another body that is present in the space. So for me, it has the same urgency as the human body. And so it is also about how can I care for the space.
But in that sense, not everybody deals the same way with nudity or collectively. And an important theme during these programs is inclusivity in that sense. Not everybody identifies with, with a binary gender. How can you be inclusive with people who aren't comfortable to share their bodies with other people, or don't share their bodies with every gender? How do you deal with that?
I think it's a very nice question, because also depending on the religion that the person has, there is a difference in how you open up your body. And I think that's why I'm also at the moment working more with the feet, because they're a bit easier to show. But I think this is something that you solve with design, because basically the entrance is a way of making a person comfortable to be in the space. And so there are different phases. Also, I give people skirts to change into. So, and there is a way of changing, and there is a way of entering through washing the feet. So all these kind of first rituals, they are meant to make a person feel comfortable with the space that they're entering. And also, I think it's a lot about kind of, I guess, a bit of moderation, I guess, from my side, of kind of engaging and feeling at what wavelength is the person who is coming. Because if somebody is super excited and hyped up, and then I see that the person who is in the bathing space is very relaxed, there needs to be this moment of transition that should happen in this first area of the bathing space. So I think also just generally the way that they're built is kind of always, there are stages of engaging with it.
Thank you for now. We will return to you as well later, but I would like to introduce our next guest. And our next guest is Oluwatomilola Adefioye, and she's a designer and educator. Are you there? Yes, I can see you on screen. a warm welcome to you as well. You created a labor of love, and that's also a personal caring ritual that you implement in your daily life. Can you tell us about that?
Well, labor of love, it's it was born out of my final project on my master's in graphic communication design. And it was looking at the sort of like the way Black hair is discussed on its own, and sort of like the discussions around it, and how Black hair is practical, it's political, and it's not just hair, and how sort of thinking about the imagery around it and the language used around, and how that communicates that imagery. And obviously, as a Black woman with Black hair, it became very personal, and it was sort of born out of my own personal experiences and that of my family, my friends, and just knowing that my experiences aren't singular, and it's sort of like across sort of like countries, cultures. I know that even sort of, you know, as long as you're a Black woman, or you're Black person, it was focused on sort of Black women, like predominantly, but those experiences with your hair are shared.
Can you give a little bit of context about why Black hair is politicized? Because I don't know whether everybody knows it, but when people who talk about Black hair, it's also almost talking about the quality of Black hair, and that's very emotional. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, Black hair, in a way, so I think a good example is for Angela Davis, is a great example of how Black hair is politicized. So she's an activist, and she's famous, and even if you don't recognize her name, you know what she looks like, you know the sort of image of her with her afro, and the afro becoming a symbol of sort of like the Black Power movement, the Black Panther movement, and thinking about how that is a sort of protest in itself. And that was part of a natural hem. It was called a sort of natural, and it was just sort of like embracing natural hair. And then now, you know, you can't move away from the image of the afro as this powerful thing. And I remember reading an article about Michelle Obama, and you know, her hair was always straight, and it was sort of like post the presidency that you would see her with her natural hair, and it's curly, and it can be in an afro style. But if, for example, when her husband was running for president, she had natural hair and it wasn't an afro, the outcome would have certainly been different, because it was so politicized. It's sort of like,
can I make a generalization about Black hair? And please do correct me if I'm wrong. What I understood, and my family's from Suriname, and you know, I got a little bit of that conversation as well. But what I understood is that for generations long, you had to, if you had Black hair, you had to emulate a Western hair. So the straighter it was, the better it was. So if you were born with kind of straight hair, that was considered to be an asset. And if you didn't have straight hair, but if you had a curly hair, that's something that was considered to be bad. And even in Suriname, there's this jargon where you have good hair or bad hair, and bad hair meant that you had, you know, the little curls that can form an afro. And if you had good hair, it would be straight. And if I'm correct as well, is that, you know, wearing an afro, which is very common at the moment, was a couple of generations back, or not even a couple, one generation back, it was considered to be unkept. So if you had an afro hair that wasn't straight, it was unkept hair. Am I correct in describing it this way?
Yeah, definitely. That's the experience of a lot of people. And I think even till sort of now, there's like, if your hair is not straight, or if it's curly, it has to be a certain type of coil. It can't be nappy. That's not good. It has to be sort of like, if it's not in extensions, or if it's not in a weave, or if it's not under a wig, it's not considered done. So there was a sort of, in the last sort of maybe 10 years, there's a sort of like resurgence of more Black women sort of saying, actually, no, I'm not chemically straightening my hair anymore. I'm going to sort of like embrace my natural hair. And then with that, the sort of a common experience, I experienced it too. And like, you know, family members, aunties saying, why are you doing that? Like, why don't you just straighten it? And as your hair's growing out, they're just like, well, when are you going to do your hair? If your hair's not like in sort of braids, or if it's just in its natural state, it's not done.
Yeah, exactly.
And even sort of seeing my niece, and, you know, if her hair's just in like 2 ponytails, like any other child would have 2 ponytails, they would ask her mom, like, oh, when are you going to do her hair? Like, what are you going to do to it? Like, it can't, in its natural state, it's not done, it's not finished, it's not complete.
Yeah. And it's weird. We've got a short clip where we can see in what way the hair is politicized. Let's have a look at the clip.
You know those stories that affect you so deeply, and when you tell the person, oh my God, this is what you said to me, they don't remember, but you remember it clear as day because it affected and hurt you so much. I remember this day clear as day. We were walking to CDT with my friend and we were talking about hair, and then she touched my hair, and I was so proud of the way I did my hair because normally my mum used to do my hair for me. And when I got to year 9, I started experimenting with different hairstyles. So I finally managed to pack my hair up in a high bunch, although my hair wasn't that long, but my hair was okay, I would say. And I was very proud of myself. And she touched my hair and she was like, oh, your hair feels like an iron sponge. And I felt so dejected and demoralized because, especially with the background I came from, I moved to this country and I got into year 6 and I was bullied heavily, and I carried that with me through year 7, year 8, year 9. So when I started to feel like more like myself, my accent had changed, I started to have like a sense of identity. So when she said that, it just took me back to square one, and I'm just like, oh, I don't really fit in then, because if my hair feels like an iron sponge, like what the hell does that mean? And like growing up now and looking at things, and when I look like an iron sponge and I take a strand from an iron sponge, I would say that is actually the curl pattern of my hair. But why would we compare my black hair to an iron sponge in the first place? But if you were talking about a white person's hair or mixed race person's hair, you would never use such a connotation as to say your hair is like an iron sponge. And sometimes it's sad, because why is it that we always equate negative things or things that they're not necessarily good with being black?
Yeah, I think this is the essence of you know, how hair is politicized in a sense, and how it becomes so personal. Like I said, family members of mine were, you know, they got crazy because everybody wanted to touch their hair, which is a huge thing, actually. Hair salons, in a way, are safe spaces in order to discover hair and talk about hair as well. I would like to talk about the salons a bit later as well, but what I'd like to mention too is that social media played a huge influence to stimulate the emancipation of black hair and the awareness of natural hair as well. Did you experience that too?
Yes, definitely. And I know a lot of people, that's been the experience. I think it's interesting because you have the rituals growing up. So growing up, my hair was chemically relaxed from quite a young age. So the ritual was every sort of 6 weeks, you would sort of like go to the salon, get it straightened, and then your hair's all nice, and then you do it again. That was the sort of ritual. So then when, you know, myself and so many others, when we decided to, you know, have natural hair, my mum didn't know what to do with it, because from sort of like years ago, it's been straight. So she's like, well, you know, I was looking to YouTube, and it was other black girls like me who were learning how to do their hair and learning what to use, what not to use. And it was lots of sort of shared experiences like, oh, use this, don't use this, try this, don't try that. And that leads on to another sort of kettle of fish about sort of like the industry, and like sort of like, of course, capitalism plays a role, and just sort of like loads of different products and things. And then sort of like thinking back now, no one really knew what they were doing. Everyone was just, A was telling B to do C, and then it would sort of just go around in a circle. So it's like, who is the expert? You know, aren't you the expert of your own hair in a way?
Mm. It's interesting because there was a whole industry built around relaxing hair, making it look more straight. But now the opposite happened as well. Now there's this huge industry built on having your hair natural and needing products, natural products, in order to keep your hair natural. So that's weird as well. I could fill a whole episode about hair. Let's not do that now. Can you tell me about salons, because they closed because they were considered not to be essential shops in a way, and how did that affect people during the pandemic that we experience?
Oh, yeah, of course, sort of like all over you had, I think, not just with black hair or Afro hair, it was all over people. Well, I don't know how to cut my hair. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to do that. And you saw a lot of people saying, actually, I'm going to try learning how to braid my own hair, or I'm going to try learn how to lock my own hair. Or some people, they've never washed their hair before because it's just something you do at the salon. So it became just sort of like observing how people prioritize their hair in comparison to how the government prioritized sort of like grooming or hair. Something is like, it seems trivial, but it's such an important part of the way you look. And it's sort of like thinking back, it was so funny. I remember because both my mom and my sister have locks. So at the time, their hair was sort of growing out. And I was like, well, why don't you just learn to do it yourself? And they were like, oh, no, it's too hard. So then all of a sudden they were like, we're going to the salon. And I was like, but we're in lockdown, it's closed. So like the salon had a little clandestine operation going on, like opening the shutters, and loads of people were there because that's how much they valued doing their hair. So there was a thing of people who couldn't live without salons. And there were people who I would say I'm part of that class of people who our homes became our salons a long time ago because I learned how to do things myself. I do my braids myself. I haven't stepped foot in the salon in maybe 2+ years because I've just sort of like, it's become important to me to know how to do things on my own and to understand my hair and understand how I'm sort of like handling. And I guess in a way it's part of my design practice as well, sort of adjacent to it.
Thank you so much. We will return to you later. Kursat, we've talked about different kinds of rituals, new rituals, whether it's bathing, whether it's taking care of your hair, or whether it's the rituals that you mentioned, the rituals of appreciation. If we look into the future, if you look into designing cities, how can we take these experiences that we had, how can we take that in our thinking in designing cities and creating spaces for rituals? Because it seems that every group has got a different set of rituals. So how can we embody those all? Have you got advice for us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think what I am hearing is the needs are very nuanced, and like you can, for inclusivity, it's really hard. I guess one thing that I'm thinking of is this idea of participatory design, like this idea of listening to people when we are designing parts of the city. I mean, city is there, right? It's like, it's already there, but how do you reimagine or repurpose some of the parts of the city, or designing new buildings or new experiences? Yeah, one area is really tuning in to the needs of that audience that you are designing around. So I guess you can do that by listening to participants of that neighborhood, that city, and then creating safe spaces for different players in that neighborhood to express themselves, and then almost like co-creating spaces and co-creating those containers so people can build their rituals around. So yeah, I'm thinking a lot around that idea of co-creation these days. So I will be teaching another class around civic design. So that's one. Another one is this idea of spotting the buds, like the seeds of human behavior. We call this ritual spotting, like this idea of maybe in your neighborhood or in your whatever, in your community, there are already people are organically creating these rituals or activities around space. How do you recognize that and then amplify those? I think my example, I want to give an example, but it's more from the workplace context. So one of our friends, she recognized that people are leaving lots of, in the office context, they are using these leftovers in their fridge to, they were using those leftovers for their lunch, and then they took that idea and then created a ritual around like most creative leftover lunch competition or something like that. So that was more like she observed that people are having a behavior, and then she amplified that through ritual. So yeah, I would say
so if I'm correct, it's about recognizing behavior, recognizing patterns that you described earlier, and creating to repeat that and making it formal almost. You create rituals in a sense.
Yeah.
Great.
So those are the two strategies I would think.
Yeah. I've got a question for Yelizaveta as well. How can we, in a society where efficiency is so important and economic reward is important as well, how can we make space for rituals? Because I think the sign of rituals is that it's not financially beneficial. But how can we create an awareness that there should be, that should be taken in account as well when redesigning an area or redesigning a city?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it is quite a complicated thing, because then it goes in contradictions with the values of the capitalist society, basically. Like, because if you're creating a space of leisure, a space of enjoyment, and potentially you're creating it ideally for a diverse crowd, and making it for a diverse crowd means that maybe it is free.
But we've made the step, considering there has to be green, there has to be, it has to be more nature in city.
Yeah.
How can you apply the same method in order to create the awareness, not only about being green and being healthy, but also about creating rituals and having places of self-care?
I think maybe it's also about learning to, as makers, the people who initiate spaces, to position yourself in a certain way or explain to people the value of these things, because potentially in the end, when, I don't know, for example, in the Netherlands, I feel that communicating that there is a necessity to accommodate rituals, I can imagine myself explaining it to a developer and potentially them recognizing something, whether in Russia it would be very hard to communicate on that level. So I think it all depends into how much you can also invest into educating people, or finding a way of making this conversation very consistent and present, so that the mindset changes. Because I don't think that there needs to be a recognition of a different values. So like these experiences need to become recognized as very valuable. What can happen is that you start and then you develop them, and then by example you show people that they enjoy it, and then they keep coming back, and then it gives more I think leverage for you to show that this can work.
So it's just starting, showing by example, and creating leverage by having people to appreciate it, and to have that as a way of making it more important.
I think that would be probably what I do at the moment.
Exactly,
like,
just doing it. Oluwatomilola, I've got a question for you as well. What role can designers play in regard to creating more awareness, or creating, just putting it into practice? What's the role of designers here, or the responsibility of designers?
I would say that there probably isn't a straightforward answer, because I think it probably starts at rethinking your approach to designing for cities, designing for care, designing for whatever, to sort of the foundation of what you understand the purpose of something to be, or if you're seeing yourself as a problem solver, or to sort of like have just a sort of like a blanket fix or a band-aid fix, then you're often creating more problems. Because I think when you were talking, it kind of reminded me of a project in London, and what Kursat was saying about co-creation and sort of different people working together. There's a, without going into detail, but there's essentially a project and it includes hair salons and things in a sort of like previously predominantly Black community, which has now been gentrified. So they've created a space that it's sort of like co-ownership, co-creator, but because the foundation of it isn't, it's meant to be owned by the people, but how do you fit that into a gentrification project? It can't truly be, it won't truly work because the foundation of it isn't with a sort of aim for inclusivity or aim for sort of care. Its foundation is profit.
Yeah.
So it can only go so far.
And that's the basis of co-creation, is that everybody needs to have a seat at the table, but there has to be a basis of equality as well. And if there's inequality because the basis is profit, or if there's inequality because the area is being gentrified and money's being involved, then there's a problem. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, and you see it again and again. It won't work, or it will start working, but then there'll be issues because it's not. If it's supposed to be inclusive, but you've got, when you have, especially when you have different stakeholders, you've got developers, you've got this. The people that win are the people that stand to profit the most.
Right. Inclusivity has to be there at every level and not only as a band-aid at the end. Right. Unfortunately, time has run out, so we have to close this program off. But I do hope that in future we will continue this conversation as well, because I think it's very important, especially when it deals with rituals that is not profitable and which aim is not to be profitable at all, but to have the self-care and well-being of the people involved. Well, thank you so much to our guests. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much for sharing your projects with us. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing new projects in future from you as well. So can I get a round of applause for our guests, please?
Thank you. Great evening, guys.
Thank you. And we will be back on the 28th of February with the first part of the One World's Fellowship, Redesigning Journalism, the Power of Language. So make sure that you have to check that program as well. If you want to know more about the programs from Pakhuis de Zwijger, make sure to go to the website www.dezwijger.nl. If you'd like to make a contribution that will benefit the programs directly, please do so, and do that at dezwijger.nl/pay. For every contribution that you leave there will benefit the programs directly. This was it from me. If you would like to have more information about Designing Cities for All, please go to dezwijger.nl/DCFA. This was it from me. Hope to see you next time, and have a good evening. Bye-bye.